specificity is essentially how we target the elements on our page. So the least specific elements are the tag names, for instance, a P tag or an H1 tag or a body tag. After that, we have a class, which is like this one, second or first. After that, we have IDs. Do I have any IDs in here? I don't think I have any IDs in here, but if we did, second P line right here are the most powerful of all. After that, we have the important selector that you would write in your CSS. So if you have like body, then you have like background color black, and then you do this. This is even more specific than an inline style. So I caution against using important because it's very hard to override later. And we should try to be as least specific as possible when we are designing our CSS, just so that whenever we do need to get more specific, we can always either add more elements to our selector or choose a selector that has higher specificity. Okay. So the more things that we tack on, the more specific that we get. So for instance, if I do body P, okay, that's more specific than just body or just P. Okay, and I'm going to show you guys what I mean with that right now. So the body by itself, I'm going to give it a background color of what's a good color? I'm a big fan of fire brick. Okay, so if we save this and we come back over here, okay, everything here is fire brick. Okay, if we do P, background color, goldenrod. Okay, so the P, we're just selecting the paragraph tags, but let's get rid of this guy here because we don't really, this and this are pretty much the same thing. But if we have like a P with, do we have any spans in here? Right here. So a P tag with a span tag will be more specific than just the P tag alone, because we have two selectors. Even though the P has a background color of goldenrod, and this one has a background color of green, the green is going to outpower because we have two selectors, meaning that our specificity is higher. So if we come back to this chart, we would have one for the P and then two for the span. So this would be more specific than this guy right here, because this would just be a 1 in the element place right here. Does that make sense to everybody? I wish I could see your faces in person. Okay, if anything doesn't make sense or if you guys have any questions, please just drop in the chat or just interrupt while I'm speaking so I can answer them for you. So
can you change the green in your example document?
Can you repeat that?
Like, shouldn't the P spans be green right now when we go to your index?
Yes.
So I didn't see them. I didn't see them being green. I just saw them.
Oh, we haven't done it yet.
Like, oh, there they are.
Yeah.
But so you have to highlight it?
No. I had to just refresh the page.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, this isn't React anymore. We don't have a lot of reloading. So cool, yeah. Bum, 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 bum. So as we can see, this has more specificity than these two. However, we have a span here. If we give one of these guys a class name, for instance, this 1 second first, a class is always going to be more specific than an element. So we're going to do second and background color pink. Okay, so this guy, even though this has 2 tags, the class by itself is more specific than any number of tags that we put in here. We could have 100 tags and just one single class selector will be more powerful than all those tags. So if we look back over here, that's because now we have a 1, and then it doesn't matter how many we have over here. Like this is a tens is going to be more powerful than any single ones. Okay, so and even if we put this above that, because we also have the cascade to think about, because things that fall further down the line will take precedence over things that are higher up in our style sheet. But as long as it's more specific, it doesn't matter. So second, see, this is more specific than this. It'll still be the same thing. So if we come back to our document here, this still is the same. Now, second and first are both classes. So in this case, if I have another class selector here called first, and I change the background color to, I don't know, what's another color? Violet. Okay, now because these two have the same specificity of 1, this guy, or of 10, this guy and this guy, the one that falls second is the one that's going to take precedence. So this is where the cascade comes in cascading style sheet. Okay, so this guy is going to be more powerful than this guy just because it falls second in the style sheet. But they both have the same specificity. So when 2 selectors have the same specificity, whatever falls last in the style sheet is going to take precedence. Cool, does that make sense? No questions, cool. So back to the basic document flow. So a HTML document is going to flow top to bottom, left to right. Like I said before, p tags and divs and ULs are block level tags, meaning they're going to flow one after the other. This that we see, this red line above these guys, is because our browser comes with some predefined styles already called the user agent style sheet. Okay, and it's gonna add things like margin, padding, like this H1 here. Why is this bigger? We didn't add any styles for this H1 to be bigger than these guys. Well, that comes from the browser itself, and that's called your user agent style sheets. So if we want to like remove these margins on the paragraph tags, then we would have to override the browser styles and give it a margin of 0. Now if we refresh this, all these are up against each other now. So we got rid of the user agent style sheets of those margins. Same thing for our H1 tag. If we want the H1 tag to be the size of the other font, then we'll do font size. And your browser most browsers, the user agent style sheet is at 16 pixels. Don't always trust that because your users can override this. Like for instance, if they are vision impaired, they might have their default font size in their browser in their settings to a larger setting. So don't always think that it's going to be 16 pixels because it might not be. So if we reset that, you can see that now it's the same size as these guys. And the font weight normal would make it just like a regular P element. Now this is all the same. Okay, any questions on that so far? Cool. So I want to talk a little bit about selectors next and how to combine selectors, because there are two selectors that we're going to be using later that are pretty important, and those are the direct descendant selector and the adjacent sibling selector. Okay, so the direct descendant selector is this guy, and if we do this, we're gonna say the body, all the p tags that are direct descendants of the body are going to have a background color of fire brick. So that means only p tags that are children of the body are going to have this background color. So this is gonna throw our styling and make it look a little hideous right now when we get rid of this guy. Okay. So again, these are still more specific, the first and the second. But this direct descendant of, what happens is if we have, let's get rid of this first and second over here. So if we wrap this guy in a div, okay, now this guy is not a direct descendant of the body because the direct descendant of the body in this case is the div. It's no longer the p tag. Does that make sense to everybody? Let me get rid of this thing here for you. So body, anything that's a direct child of it is going to have a background color of fire brick. So div is a direct descendant of body, but p is not a direct descendant of body, it's a direct descendant of div. However, all the other p tags that are direct descendants of body, okay, are getting that style that we defined up here, which is a background color of fire brick. So the first one doesn't, because the first one is nested inside of this div. Any questions on the direct descendant selector? Cool. Now, the next selector is the adjacent sibling. So what this is going to do is, let's do it on p tags instead. And let's go to this div here. So we're going to do p plus and let's just put the body back to red. Okay, so this says any p tag that is a brother of the first or sister of the first p tag is going to have a background color of green. So anything that is a direct sibling of this p tag that's how we're going to select these guys here and turn them green. So the first one doesn't get green because we don't have just p by itself. Here, the first one is yellow, but here, all its siblings are going to have, all the siblings of this guy are going to have a background color of green. So we come back over here. Bam. Okay, so these are two selectors that we're going to be using a little later to set up our CSS so that we can create some styles throughout our page with just like 2 or 3 lines of code that's going to make our whole page responsive, so that the size is going to move back and forth and grow and shrink depending on the size or the width of our box, of our window. Cool. So the next thing that we need to look at is the box model, and I'm sure you guys already know what the box model is, but we're going to go over it anyway just so that we can talk about the different elements of the box model and a better way to create more consistent behavior with our margins, paddings, and border by using something called border box instead of content, which is the default box model that all browsers use. So if we pull out the inspector, and we do this, so we go to elements, and we look at this P right here, this P tag. This is a block level element, and it has some size, which is the content, all right? And in the box model, it's the blue stuff that's inside of here. This tells us the size of our content. So over here we have 506.4 pixels in width and 36.8 pixels in height. So the next thing is padding, and we have 0 padding. What padding does for us is it essentially increases the size of our content in a sense by giving us, or the size around the content, by giving us a little more room for the content. So the background color of yellow is still going to be there if we add padding. Even though the text size is going to be the same, all the yellow is going to expand when we add padding to it. So if we do in this p tag, we're going to give it a padding of 1.5 m. Okay, and m is a relative unit. It's not like a pixel. What this means is it's 1.5 times our regular or root font size. And our root font size from the browser is 16 pixels. So 1.5 times 16, that means that our padding is going to be 24 pixels all the way around. So we're going to have 24 pixels at the top, 24 pixels on the right, 24 pixels on the bottom, and 24 pixels on the left. So if we refresh this, what in the world? Let's give our root element this. Oh, did I not reload the page? I did reload the page. Padding 1.5 and background color yellow. Now let's go with this guy. And a root element is just like calling HTML. I just like using it because I feel like it's a little more explicit. So root, font size, 16 pixels. There we go. So because I hadn't defined the root, it didn't like the padding over here, so we didn't define the root font size or the font size for the things I have. It didn't give it any padding. So if we look back at this and we come over here, and we click on this guy, you can see now that our padding is 24 pixels all the way around. Okay, so all that this does, this 1.5M, is it multiplies our font size by this value. So it's kind of just like a multiplier that will scale up or down. So that's how we get 24 pixels all the way around. Let's see. What else do I got? Okay, so then margin is next. And margin can be a little tricky sometimes. And again, you see this side margin over here? This is the user style agent giving us this. If we go to the body, see this little orange margin on the left, right, top and bottom of 8 pixels on the body? This is coming from the user agent, which is the browser. So if we want to get rid of that margin, we would have to put 0 here, and now it's going to be right up against the sides. Save. And now we got rid of that margin on the sides. Okay. A good pattern to use is something called the double container pattern, which means that you want to wrap everything inside of a container so that you can center your content on a page and give yourself a little bit of space on the side. So like on the left side here, I'm sorry, on the right and on the left side, we want to have a little bit of space. So the way that we do that is we wrap everything inside of the body. In another div, and we can call it container. You can call it anything you want really, but I'm calling it container just because I feel it's it makes sense. We're gonna contain everything in there, and we're gonna come from here to here, tab it over. Okay, so with the double container pattern, what we want to do now is we have something with a class called container. And we want to give it a max width. So a good max width is 1200 pixels. That means your content will never be bigger than 1200 pixels. And the reason for that value is because most people have a pretty big screen size, and if you have like one of those long monitors that are like those wide viewing angles, you don't want your content to stretch across that entire viewing angle. Like if you have one of those like 42-inch monitors that are like gaming monitors that are curved, and we have just text that's going to be read on the page, you don't want the text to start all the way on the left and go all the way to the end on the right for like 4,500 pixels or however large some of these things are. So we're going to give it a max width of 1,200 pixels. Okay, and then we're going to give it something called margin 0 and auto. Okay, and what this does is it gives it a margin of 0 at the top and the bottom, and a margin of auto to the left and to the right. And that essentially gives us as much margin as we can get on both sides. It'll give us margin. So if it's 1200 pixels and we're over by like 600 pixels, the margin on the left is going to be 300 and the margin on the right is going to be 300, and it's going to center our content in the middle. So I'll show you how that looks now. If we refresh this and I do this. Oh wait, I didn't save. Okay, now everything is contained within that max width of 1200 pixels. If we get smaller, now it's less than 1200, so everything's right up against itself. But if we get bigger than 1200 pixels, it stops growing. And then the margin will start being added to both the left and the right side. Okay, so that's a nice way to center your content fairly easily, and it's called the double container pattern. Okay, so this is a shorthand. I don't know if you guys know the shorthand for things like margin and padding, where you could add 4 values here. So it starts with top, right, bottom, left. So this one's going to give it a margin on the top, this one's going to give it a margin on the right, this one's going to give it a margin on the bottom, and this one's going to give it a margin on the left. A good way to remember this, a good mnemonic, is called trouble, T-R-B-L, trouble, so top, right, bottom, left. So if we wanted to accomplish the same thing without the shorthand that I did a minute ago, we want to do margin auto on the left, and margin, I'm sorry, on the right, and margin auto on the left, and these would be 0 and 0. Okay, and that should accomplish the same thing. Okay, so essentially what we said here is give it a margin top of 0, give it a margin right of auto, give it a margin bottom of 0, give it a margin left of auto. Okay, and then another shorthand is just top and bottom, 0, left and right, auto. Okay, not super necessary to know. You can always look this up super fast. You can Google it. If you are having a hard time remembering the direction, or you can just do margin left, auto, and margin right, auto. Okay, and that has no shorthand. That's just the exact rule set that we want to use. Everything between the brackets here is called a rule set. So this is the rule set for the container selector. Okay, and again, this will do the same thing that we just did a minute ago. Okay, and that's a nice way to center stuff. Okay, and then we could add more containers. So if we want to add a container to all the stuff inside of the container, so it's even smaller once we reach that 1200 pixels, you could say interior or content or whatever you guys want to call it, and we'll drop it in here. Okay, and now that guy, what did I call it? Interior. So we'll do dot interior. And this guy, we're going to give a width of 80%. And now that's going to have a width of 80% of its parent container. So, and container max width 1200 pixels with 80%. Why is this guy? In this case, let's do Alright, well that didn't work out the way that I wanted it to. Sorry, I thought that we can give the interior container a width of 80% and it would just take 80% of its parent container through inheritance, but I'm missing something and I'm giving you guys false info on that one, so disregard that interior container business. That would have been like a triple container. Okay, cool. So any questions so far on the box model, centering, and the double container pattern? Cool. So in the box model, we also have the border, which is the final thing. So if we come back and we look at this guy, the border sits between the padding and the margin. So what margin does is we get a little bit of space between elements. So margin, if we give a margin bottom to this guy, you're gonna see that we're gonna see the background of red, and it's gonna give a space between the top p tag and the one that follows it immediately. So this one is this guy here. We're going to give it a margin bottom of 1M, which is going to be 16 pixels. Save. Is there something overriding that? Oh, margin 0. So we want to be a little more specific to be able to give this one, see, because these are both the same specificity, P and P. And I gave this one a margin bottom of 1M, but then further down the cascade, we have a margin of 0, my styles being overwritten. So this also has a class name of second. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to say second. Margin bottom of 1M. And we're going to get rid of this guy here, because that's going to be overwritten. Okay, and there is our margin between these two. So a funny thing about margin is that margin collapses when it touches itself, like top and bottom. Think of margin kind of like a like your own personal space bubble, right? Let's say you need 3 feet. Okay, and somebody else needs 3 feet of space between themselves, and you're, I don't know, at a bus stop. You both don't need to add those 3 feet and be 6 feet away from each other. You just need those 3 feet to be comfortable with your personal space, right? Same thing with margin, at least when it comes to top and bottom. Left and right, this doesn't apply. But top and bottom margin, the margins will collapse. And I'm not sure if it's the largest of the margins or the one that follows it that's going to take the precedence. So we can find out by adding margin top to this p tag that's right here. We're going to give it a margin top, and then we're going to give it the same amount, and you're going to see that this is not going to grow. Okay, as you guys can see, even though this guy has a margin bottom of 6 pixels and this guy has a margin top of 16 pixels, this isn't 32 pixels now. Why did that happen? Because the margin collapsed. So only one of them will take precedence. So if we make this 2, oh, I'm sorry. Actually, yeah, let's do this one because it's a little more specific. So 2Ms. Now we'll see that this one will have 32 pixels of margin. Okay, but not 48. So the margin still collapses. If we look at this here, you can see the margin there, that it's coming from the top. Okay, it's coming from this yellow box, not from the green box. As you can see how it's extending down. If we look at this guy, okay, you can see that the margin is missing. There is no margin. It's got it, but it's running into the margin for the top one. And if we look at this guy, the margin goes down. So the margins butt up against each other and they collapse. So one goes into the other. All right, so you still see the margin, but you can see that it's going into the top container, the top block level element. All right, does margin collapse make sense to everybody? And the way that margin works makes sense? Any questions so far? Cool. So, we've done margin. If we add a border to anything, the border will be before the margin but after the padding. So this one here, we're going to give it a border of 2 pixels. We're going to say that it's a solid border, and we're going to make it black. If we refresh this, okay, the border is on all the P tags I put it. So all the borders have are 2 pixels, they're solid and they're black, and they go all the way around the content with the padding, but they don't go into the margin. So the margin is separate from the content of the stuff that you're trying to style. And that essentially is the box model. So one of the crappy things about the box model is that, let's say that you want something of 300 pixels, okay? And then you add a border of 2 pixels, okay? So you want a width of 300 pixels, and then you add a border of 2 pixels. Your new size for your element is gonna be with a width of 304 pixels. So it's gonna add 2 pixels on the left and 2 pixels on the right, which sometimes is going to give us behavior that we are just not very happy with. So if we select one of these guys again, we're going to see that we have a, actually let's change the width of a P tag. Let's change the width of these guys so we can see this a little better, to 300 pixels. The computer really slows down when I'm recording and doing Zoom at the same time. All right, so we click on this, and now we see that we have 300 pixels of our content, then the 24 pixels of our padding on each side, and the 2 pixels of our margin on each side. So when we have 300 plus 2 is 302, plus 24 is 326, plus another 24 is 350, plus another 2 is 352. So the entire length of our element is 352 pixels. So if we were doing things by like percentages or something like that, and you wanted to do like 50% of the page, it will be, instead of 300 pixels, let's do 50%. It will be more than 50%. It'll be 50% plus those 2 pixels, plus those 24 pixels, plus the other 2 pixels, plus the 24. So if you want to put elements next to each other, what's going to happen is that they're not going to fit. So the next element is going to come down. So you would think that 50% will give you half of the space on the page, and then the other 50% will give you the other half. But the reality is that because of the way that CSS works, it makes it makes the entire element grow, as opposed to you setting an element of a certain size and keeping it there. So it creates like this weird situation where even though we give something a width of 50%, it's larger than 50% when we do something like this. So for instance, let's say we want to put these 2 next to each other. I'm gonna make these guys display inline block so they don't stack. Instead, they take up as much space as they can next to each other. So I'm gonna make my p tags display inline block. Okay, so we would think that they would stack next to each other as inline block elements, but they don't. And if we start lowering this width and we try to find what's called the magic number, eventually they will start sitting next to each other. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so a magic number is something that we want to try to avoid in CSS, which means playing with it until like we get the behavior that we want. But at some point it breaks. Okay, 47% is too big. 46% is still too big. 45%. Now they fit. Okay, so this is like a little idiosyncrasy of CSS, where the content is bigger than what we think it is, even though we gave it a size of 50%, because those borders and the margins add to the entire size of the element. So one way that we can fix that is by changing the box sizing property, which every new project that you guys start, I highly recommend changing from content box, which is the default behavior of CSS, to something called border box. Okay, and now border box, when you give something a width of 50%, it'll be 50%. So your margins and your paddings will shrink all the content down to give us that 50%. So if we come back over here and we do 50% now, this will whatchamacallit, this should behave the way that we think it should behave, which is at 50% they should sit next to each other. For some reason they're not here. I think it's because of the minimum size 1200. Alright, let me play with this a little bit. margin. Does the border add to it? The border might add to it. Nope. Display inline block. Is there anything else that I'm doing here? Box sizing, border box. Is this right? RP tags. Why is this not sitting next to each other? I feel like I'm telling you to, I'm doing what I'm telling you guys not to do, which is the, what did I change here? This should be working. Max width 1200 pixels. Display inline block, 48%. Are these just displaying block? Properties ignored due to the display width, display inline, the width, height, margin, top, floats. Properties have no value, yeah, so it should be inline block. Bear with me here, guys. I don't know why this isn't working. I know this should definitely stack next to each other. Container. What is this little bit of margin here between the two? Okay, so something's giving it a little margin in between the two of them. I'm not sure what is giving it the margin, which is not allowing them to fill in the space. Alright, so I'm guessing something, if you guys can see this little bit of red, is taking up space, but trust me when I tell you guys that now the entire size of these things are 300 pixels from left to right, including the margin, the border, and the padding. So let's click on one of these guys. So width should be 45% of its parent container, which is 1200. So 50% should be 600 pixels. The padding is still making it bigger. That is not right. We have box sizing, border box. Sorry guys, give me a second because maybe I wrote it wrong. No, I got it right. Border and padding in the values you specify for an element, width and height. If you set an element's width to 100 pixels, that one will include any border or padding you added. For some reason, content box is not, I'm sorry, border box is not displaying the way that it should here. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Display block, so that's inline. Maybe when we do display inline block, it inherits $600 plus 24. Okay, for some reason this isn't working the way that it should. Just trust me that border box does contain the entire size. I'm gonna have to troubleshoot this or look into this a little later why it's not working in this particular example. But the entire width of this guy, if it's 50%, should be 600 pixels, not 648 like it's showing with the padding on both sides. So there's some other rule that's happening here, and I'm not sure which one it is that is not taken to that border box. I'm gonna try it in Firefox. But this is something that's supported by every browser, so I'm not sure why in this case we're having that issue. Inspect. $600 and it's getting the padding on both sides here too. All right, well, I gotta look into that and I'll get back to you at, you guys like my background? this afternoon's lecture. But yeah, whenever we build a new project, just use box sizing, border box. And it'll help us avoid a bunch of issues with the things not behaving the way that they should. In this case, things are not behaving the way they should too, but let me see how I did. Box sizing, border box, yeah, root. Let me add this here. Star, comma, save. that looks like it worked. There we go. Okay. So I needed to add this little bit of extra. It says for every selector, and then before and after, the box sizing is going to be inherited. So I guess we didn't inherit the border box for the other elements. So we do have to add this extra bit of text here to inherit the box sizing of border box. So if we go back now, and sorry it took me so long to figure this out. If we go back and we put this as display inline block, it's still okay, at 49% it works because we have this little bit of extra content that I don't know where it's coming from. But essentially, these are now 600 pixels because they're 50% of the containing element, which is 1200 pixels. So I had to give it a little less than the 50%, but that's better than the 45% that we had to guess at before. So we have to get rid of this little bit of extra margin or space that we have between the elements. That I don't know where it's coming from, but essentially border box, what it does is it makes your elements the size that we actually specify them. In our case, at 50% it's 600 pixels, at 49% is whatever 49% of 1200 is. So 0.49 times 1200, so it'll be 588 pixels on each one. Cool. So that is that's the box model. This is what we're going to use in all our projects to have behavior that is more consistent with our box sizing, and that way we don't have to worry about the padding and the margin, adding extra space to our elements. So I'm going to save this code later and make sure that you add this stuff to your code so that your code will be easier to deal with and be more responsive. So the next thing that I want to talk about now is how to position elements on the page, and we're going to talk about absolute and relative position, and we're going to open up a different item. So if we come back over here, I'm going to buy code. Okay. So over here, all I've done was I've created a class called container. I created a div called container that's got a div with a class of container, and it's got 4 other divs inside of it. Okay, and each one of these divs has a class of box, and then a class of box 1, box 2, box 3, and box 4. Okay, so I want to put these guys on the page. If we open this up in the browser, you should only see 1, 2, 3, 4. They're all stacked next to each other. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to give this guy some styles. And we're going to give the container a width of. So now I'm going to use something called viewport width. So it's called VW. And we're going to do 50 VW, and this is kind of like a percentage, but it gives us 50% of the entire width of the window. So very similar to percentage, but it gives us the entire viewport. So we're going to give it a width of 50 VW and a height of 50 VW, and this will always give us a box or a square, because the width is going to be 50% of whatever the width of the window is, and then the height is also going to be 50% of whatever the width of the window is. And let's give this a background color of tomato. now we're going to give our boxes a width of, and we want squares again, so let's make this 10 VW and a height of 10 VW and the background color of yellow green. Okay, so now we have 4 boxes stacked one on top of the other, and let's give it a border too so that we can see it a little better. 2 pixels, solid, black. Okay, so here we have our 4 boxes, and we want to be able to move these boxes around to different places on the page. So the good thing about the VW is that it causes everything, when we shrink, it's gonna move everything and scale it together. So that's one of the ways that we're gonna get that nice sizing that allows all our content to shrink and grow depending on the size of the window, and what's gonna help us create responsive elements that are going to work well in phones also. So that's because we use this VW business. Paul, welcome back, Paul. Hold on a second, guys. Okay, Paul's back in the mix. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to move elements in the in this container, and I want to be able to move them around to whatever positions that I want. So what we're going to do is we're going to give the container a position of relative, and then we're going to give our boxes a position of absolute. Okay, now this is going to make our boxes a little janky. What's going to happen is they're all going to collapse and they're going to come to this top left corner. Okay, so this position absolute is somebody here. This position absolute, what it's saying is that I want to position all these boxes absolutely relative to this container that we have here. Okay, so by doing this, all the boxes are going to collapse and they're going to come to this left corner over here. So if we refresh the page, now they are all sitting at the corner. So now we can move our individual boxes anywhere within that container by selecting one of the boxes. For instance, if we want to select box 1, we're going to give it a top of 200 pixels. Okay, and now box 1 is going to be below all the other boxes. Okay. And actually, instead of 200 pixels, let's use the same units so that it's right below the other ones. Cool. We could also move it to the right. So I can say right. Let's say I want to get it to all the way to the other edge. If I made this guy 50 VW, then I want to move it 40 VW. And that moved it too much because we're not using content sizing border box. So let's do 45 VW. I'm sorry, left, not right. So we're moving it from the left to the right, 45. I'm sorry. 40 VW. There we go. So it's moving a little outside of the box, even though this is 10 VW and this thing is 50 VW, because we didn't use that content sizing border box. So we can put that here. And you can see why this content sizing box sizing. Border box. And then we want to do the all selector, before, after, and the box sizing. Inherit. Now it will be inside of this guy. Bam, look at that. All right, so this is why I like using the content of the box sizing border box, because we don't have to worry about that extra bit of space from the padding and from the borders and from the margin. So everything will fit just nicely. Cool. So that's how we move these boxes around. We have to give the boxes a position of absolute and the container a position of relative. If we want to move another box somewhere else, like let's say we want to move box 2 to the bottom right corner, then we could do top 40 VW, and then left 40 VW, and that should get our box sitting in the bottom right corner. Oh, I made all boxes that. I want a box 2 only. Okay, now box 2 is the bottom. You could also do right to start from the right instead of starting from the left. And we could just make this 0, and it's essentially the same thing. Any questions so far? All right, awesome. So, what happens if we don't want to have position, relative, and absolute, and we just want the boxes stacked next to each other? What we can do is we can get rid of the position on this container and make our boxes position relative. And for now, let's just get rid of these lines here, and this will make our boxes just stack one on top of each other. Okay, but now because the boxes are position relative, if we give them a left, right, top, or top, they're gonna move relative to their own position in the normal document flow. So I could say box 2, I want you to move now from where you're located relative to yourself. I want you to move out of the normal document flow, left 10 VW, and top 2 VW. Okay, so now it moved from its normal position in the document 10 to the right and then 2 down. Okay, and all we did was we got rid of the container's relative position, and we gave the relative position to all the boxes, meaning that they will move relative to themselves in the normal document flow. Okay, and the last thing that we're going to cover today for this morning section before we build out this afternoon, we're going to cover Flexbox. So back in the olden days, in the olden days of CSS, to position things next to each other and to build layouts, we had to use floats, and there was all these complications with floats where their containers would collapse, and you had to apply something called a clear fix, and like all this crazy stuff. CSS 3 came out with a new set of rules called Flexbox that allow us to position things next to each other and align things vertically and horizontally fairly easily compared to the old way, which was using floats, which can be a little complicated. So we're gonna get rid of all this positioning stuff. Okay, and now with Flexbox, we're gonna have two items. Okay, one is gonna be the flex container, and then the other one is going to be the flex items. The flex container is the parent container that's going to allow us to position the items in a way that makes sense to us. So we're gonna give this container a display of flex. Okay, and whenever we display something flex has different values. So flex can be either it could display in a row style, which is the standard style, which is going to go from left to right, or we can display flex in column style, which is going to go bottom left to top to bottom. So right now, by making this container display flex, and these guys are flex items, if we refresh the page, oh, I didn't save this, they're gonna sit next to each other. Okay, so all these are, it kind of makes them be displayed like, kind of like inline block, but it's not really inline block. We can give this now a flex direction of column, and it stacks them up and down. Now the cool thing about this is that, let's say I wanted to space this evenly, I wanted these items spaced evenly, I can give this guy a property of, what is space around, shoot. Does that go on this guy? Flex direction column. Hold on, because I forgot the rule now. Space around Flexbox. Okay. It's justified content and align items were the two. I just forgot what they were called. Does that go here or here? There we go. Oh no, I had it right. So now, by giving it this space around, it's gonna give us a little bit of space between both ends, and then it's gonna space everything evenly with even amount of space in between all these guys. So if I refresh, it does this cool little layout for us here. If I do, if I bring these guys back to just regular flex direction, which is row, you can see that it gives us kind of even space between all these items. So we also have space between, which will make these guys touch at the end and then give us just a space between each item. Okay, so now these guys are going end to end, and it gives us a nice layout where these items are spaced between each other here. If our flex items take up too much space inside of the container, you can do something called flex wrap. flex direction. And what that will do is if this container gets smaller, these guys will drop to the bottom. So let's say the width of this guy was 40 instead. Now the next one jumps down to the bottom. So that's cool if you want like some stacking action for your stuff that you're displaying, so you have even columns on your in your layouts. So this flex wrap allows us to push those things to the bottom. If we remove flex wrap, it's going to overflow the container. So let's get rid of this guy. Actually, it just shrinks them, but if we do flex 1, never mind. I guess I don't know that property as well as I thought I did. So the wrap will prevent your thing from shrinking, and it'll keep their size and just move them down. Move them down in the box. And I think that's all I've got. So some of the tools that we want to use for when we build layouts is definitely this box sizing, border box, and this before after box sizing inherit, so that our sizing of our boxes are make a little more sense. Also, what we want to do is we want to add a font size, and this is going to be the font size for the entire document. And the new CSS has this cool tool called Calc that you can give different units, and it'll calculate those units for you. So I'm going to give this a font size of 0.4 ems, which would be 0.4 times 16 pixels, which is the default. It's the default font size for most browsers, unless the user changes their default font size, plus 1 VW. Okay, and this is just 1% of the display of the window itself. Okay, and then this will make just this line alone makes our entire application super responsive already, and it makes everything shrink and grow very nicely, because all these units of M that we use later, I'm not using any here, but whenever we use an M unit, it'll shrink based on the original font size. So if the font size is shrinking because the window size is shrinking by this 1 VW, the rest of our items with the padding or with the margins or with the font size will also shrink. So this is a very nifty and useful rule that we can use to make our entire thing responsive. So that's one of the things that we always want to use. So this alone gets us like 90% of the way to making our entire page responsive. Another tool that we want to use is something called the lobotomized owl. Crazy name, I know. But it looks like this. Body star plus star. Okay, and then we want to give it a margin top of 1.5 ems. And what this essentially does is it gives every item that stacks on top of each other a margin top of 1.5, which gives us a little bit of space to play with. But it doesn't give it to the first element. Okay, so this is the first element, and it could be anything. This could be a p tag, this could be a div, this could be a an anchor tag, it doesn't matter. And then it's whatever sibling follows it, any sibling is going to get a margin top of 1.5M, but not the first element that we have. So just trust me in using these rules when it comes to making our stuff responsive. Later, you guys can do more research on this. If you guys just search Lobotomized Owl, the creator of this rule wrote a nice little blog post. Lobotomized Owl on the philosophy behind using it. Okay, the only downside is every once in a while we're gonna have to fix that margin top for certain items, like P. Margin top 0. So for like just the first item, whenever we have the situation where we have too much margin, this margin top 0 is gonna come in and fix it for us. So that is the lobotomized owl. And what else do we want to use? I think that is all that we will need to build out our layout this afternoon. Are there any questions? Anything that wasn't super clear? I'm sorry if this lecture is a little all over the place. Like, we don't actually have a lecture on CSS. I actually created this myself. So any questions or any feedback on what makes sense, what doesn't make sense would be greatly appreciated, or anything that I could clarify, I'd be more than happy to. So let's take like the next, as long as it takes to answer any questions that you guys might have. Let me turn my camera back on so I can see you guys.
I have a question. Can you explain, it was kind of two questions. First, can you explain what that root thing is? And second, also, like, which is totally different, what the before and after means, like right below it?
Sure. So root is the same thing as saying HTML. Okay, which this selects all the items in HTML. Okay, this means the root node of our document. So it really starts from up here, and then it applies these rules to everything in there. It's just a selector essentially.
Okay.
Okay. Then what this is saying is every element, whether it's a p tag or a div or a tag, whatever. Okay, and then we're going to also add it before. Okay, so if we have like this before or this after, and we put like content, hi there. Okay, every element before and after the element is going to have the content of hi there now. So all this is saying every element before and after the element itself. Also, we want to give it a box sizing of inherit. So if we come back to this guy, see, everything got that hi there that I put there. So all this is doing is adding this box sizing inherit to every single element on the page. Just like we added this hi there to every single element on the page. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So just giving every element that property.
Exactly. Any other questions?
For that example, why did the hi there get printed twice for your individual boxes instead of like your green boxes, like it showed hi there twice instead of once?
Yeah, because we're doing it before and we're doing it after, and we're also doing it on the element. So we're essentially doing it 3 times. So this is the content of, actually I guess it's just twice, not 3 times. 1, 2. So it's every element. Yeah, so it's What happens if we just do this guy here? Yeah. No, so it's just before and after every element. So before the content or before what we have in the box, and then after what we have in the box, we're adding that content of hi there. So before the one and after the one.
Oh, okay.
That's like adding hi here, or just hi and hi. Okay, because we're doing it before and we're doing it after.
Okay, cool.
Other questions?
Could you just do star? Like, do you need before and after in order for the box sizing? Like, could you just do star and then whatever you want?
I haven't tried. It seems like we should be able to, right? But let's see. It does look like it works because we're not overflowing here. So let's save that. If we overflow out a little bit, yeah, so we could just add the star. I'm using this from somebody's suggestion that is a CSS whiz, so that's why I add what they recommend, which is the before and after. There might be certain situations where it makes sense, like for instance, if you're working with another like CSS framework that has the old style of box sizing, like content box instead of border box, and you're bringing in, like, I don't know, let's say Bootstrap has box sizing content box instead of border box, it might allow you to to avoid problems with compatibility between you using Bootstrap and their box sizing and then your box sizing. So I think that's the reason for the before and after. If it's just your own product and you're not going to be bringing in any outside libraries, I think you're fine leaving out the before and after and just putting the star box sizing inherit. But this is, I think, a fail-safe for third-party components like Bootstrap and Material UI or things like that.
Okay, cool.
Other questions? Bring you guys back over here so I can see your faces. All right, so I'm sorry, I know that was a lot to cover in a short period of time, and then we're going to go into building this afternoon also. And we're going to use everything that we just learned now to build out this layout that we have here. So, yeah, if you guys don't have any other questions, I will see you after lunch, and we will get to building this right over here. And we'll talk about all these elements and how to apply them to something like this. All right, cool, guys. I will see you guys at 2 o'clock.